Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Deku becomes a pure evil part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. And also go support the TALESPINNER69 for writing that awesome fanfic. Let's start this video. It was the first day of the newest year at UA High School, Japan's top heroics academy. Shouta Izawa, otherwise known as the pro hero racerhead, was having his students go through a quirk apprehension test rather than go to the opening ceremony. He's a UA teacher, and those guys get a lot of freedom in how they run their classes and manage their students, a decision that was made by the principal of UA, Nezu. Little did Nezu know that having given this freedom to some of the various staff members was going to end up biting everyone, in the ass because of a decision Izawa was going to make later that day. By the time that the quirk apprehension test was concluded, all 20 of Izawa's students in his homeroom class, Class 1A, were panting with exhaustion. Alright brats, listen up, Izawa began in a firm tone, after adding up all of your respective scores from all of the events in the apprehension test, here's how you all place. The underground hero then brought up a projection showing how each of the students placed in the apprehension test, listing only their last names for some odd reason. One student in the class in particular, Izuku Midoriya, was worried as all get out about where he would place, given that Izawa said he'd expel the student who placed last in the apprehension test. To the green-haired boy's relief, however, he did not place last, he had placed 18th, with that Hagakure girl in 19th, and that Mineta boy unfortunately in 20th. Although it was tough luck for Mineta, it was a relief to Izuku, especially considering the fact that Izuku is actually quirkless. Yeah, it's true, Izuku Midoriya is actually quirkless. Always has been. It's caused him no end of grief in his life because of the institutionalized discrimination against the quirkless. As a matter of fact, Izuku's old childhood friend Katsuki Bakugo, or Kaken as Izuku liked calling him, had been a leading figure in making life for the green-haired quirkless boy, a complete and utter hell on the basis that being quirkless is the same as being worthless in society. There was even an incident some months prior to Izuku getting into UA where Izuku met his idol, the number 1 hero All Might, where Izuku asked the symbol of peace if it was possible for a quirkless person like him to become a pro hero. All Might, predictably, shot Izuku's hopes down, even after revealing his true form, showing how vulnerable he could be at times. That was one of the incidents in Izuku's life that sealed the deal for him. One of the incidents where Izuku intended to prove everyone wrong. Izuku spent all of his time after that day studying and working out, believing that by working hard enough, he could still make it as a pro hero, despite his quirklessness being a very notable handicap. And it paid off as the results of the apprehension test ran by Izawa proved. All of Izuku's academic studying, all of his quirk analysis research, Izuku always loved studying quirks for as long as he could remember, all of his working out to achieve a level of physical fitness very few students in all of UA period could hope to match or surpass. That given Izuku the pass to stay in UA, although the apprehension test tested his physical fitness mostly. But that's all getting off subject. Izawa gave the scared Mineta a serious monotone glare that lacked even one iota of sympathy. Mineta, you haven't shown enough potential to qualify as a member of the hero course, Izawa began, at least if you ask me. As the short great boy began to cry out in complaint, the underground hero silenced him. As such, Izawa went on, I will be expelling you right away. The other students in the class said nothing, save for Mineta's silent cries. Or rather, I would be expelling you right away, Izawa said, surprising the whole class, Mineta who stopped crying especially so, but something is weighing heavily on my mind. To the piqued interest of Izuku, the underground hero turned to face him. Midoriya, Izawa began, you placed 18th in the apprehension test, despite not once using your quirk at any point. I'm curious, but is your quirk simply not useful in those tests? Izuku was about to speak up, but was cut off by Bakugo who shouted, why is Deku even here at all? He's a damn quirkless loser. Bakugo's exclamation revealing Izuku's quirkless nature surprised everyone in class. Even Izawa was surprised, although the only sign of this was an arched eyebrow. Looking to Izuku, Izawa asked, Bakugo shouting in inappropriate language notwithstanding, is what he said about you being quirkless true? Izuku was starting to worry about where this would be leading, but he knew that he had no choice but to be honest. Yes, sensei, Izuku replied, I am actually quirkless. That got the other students in the class whispering amongst themselves. A true example of what it means to be a hero, Tenya Iida muttered to himself, having grown to admire and respect the green-haired quirkless boy, and yet he has no quirk. I truly do have a lot to learn, it would seem. Wow, Echako Uraraka muttered to herself, taken aback by the revelation that the boy who saved her life during the entrance exams, the boy she was starting to have feelings for, was in truth actually quirkless. If he can do as much, if not more, than people who do have quirks, then just how far can he go in life? As it turned out, it was not all that far at all. Yeah, forget what I said about expelling Mineta, as always said, I'm expelling Midoriya instead. What? Practically everyone in Class 1 exclaimed out of shock and outrage, other than Izuku who simply stood there as his dreams were shattered once more. He doesn't have a quirk, as always said firmly to his students, and therefore has no place being in the hero course. He'll be nothing but a liability to actual heroes in the field. Turning around to leave for the principal's office, Aizawa gruffly said, class dismissed. A lot of the students didn't know what to say, the shock of someone like Izuku being expelled, despite not coming in last in the apprehension test rattling them. Well, Bakugo laughed in a sense of triumph, boasting that it's what Deku had coming for trying to be more than the piece of quirkless trash he was born as. As for Mineta, he was relieved that Izuku's quirklessness had saved him from being expelled himself. The short great boy even joined in Bakugo's mocking of the green-haired quirkless boy to an extent. Izuku wanted to cry, but he stopped short when he realized that what happened was actually something that he should have seen coming. Regardless of what all he had been able to accomplish in his life without a quirk, the simple fact that he lacked a quirk meant that he was never going to be allowed to be anyone, much less anything, that actually mattered. Not in a world where, in order to matter, it was a requirement to have a quirk. Dejected and emotionally broken, Izuku turned around and left, all the while Bakugo, and still to a lesser extent Mineta, laughed at the green-haired boy's misfortune. Izuku was walking away from the front doors of the main UA building, turning around to see the place that had always been his dream one last time before turning around to leave. No longer a place of dreams, UA High School was now a shattered hope, the last one in a long line of shattered hopes in his life. Izuku, realizing that what all he had done in the time since he first met All Might and saw his true form was all in vain, gave into despair as he realized that Bakugo was right, that Aizawa was right, that All Might was right. He couldn't be a hero. Not without a quirk. As Izuku turned around from the UA main building and walked away, he got about 10 feet away before he heard that Uraraka girl call out, "Wait up." Turning around, Izuku saw Uraraka, as well as Tenya, running to try to catch him. Both UA students, something that Izuku found himself suddenly feeling jealous of, were panting hard with exhaustion. What happened was gasped not right, Tenya said, panting to catch his breath, you've proven yourself to be gasped true hero material. Izuku looked down at the ground, the air he gave off sad and starting to grow bitter. You heard what Eraser had said. I'm not fit to be a hero. That's not true. Uraraka practically screamed, quirk or not, you're still a hero. At least if you ask me. You literally saved my life during the entrance exams, and last I checked saving lives is something a hero does. And you've truly opened my eyes, Tenya said, showing me that I still have lots to understand and learn if I'm to be a hero myself. I truly am sorry for all of the rudeness I've previously shown you, not realizing that the way that you are has made you what it truly means to be a hero. Izuku was starting to feel a little better, at least he was daring to. These two who had rushed to catch him, showing him genuine concern, didn't care that he was quirkless. He felt that maybe, just maybe, he could actually have real friends who cared about who he was, rather than what he was lacking. However, just as quickly as his hopes were raised, they were shot back down in an instant by what Tenya and Uraraka said next. There's no need to let what happened get you down, Deku, Tenya said sympathetically, I'm certain that another hero academy will show interest in you. Tenya's right, Deku, Uraraka said with a nod, so what if UA said no? I bet that Uraraka never got to finish saying what she wanted to say as Izuku, with tears in his eyes, quickly turned around and ran away, leaving the still partly winded Tenya and Uraraka behind, both of them wondering what they said that was wrong. As Izuku ran away from UA, he was still crying. He had dared to hope that he might actually have friends who cared about him, but it was soon made clear to him that it was nothing more than yet another mean stunt that Bakugo had arranged and set up solely to further taunt and humiliate him. The fact that they called him Deku was a dead giveaway, as Bakugo used that derogatory, insulting nickname for him pretty much since Izuku was first diagnosed as being quirkless all those years ago. Bakugo was right. Eraserhead was right. All Might was right. Izuku was worthless without a quirk. There was no point to even try going on if he wasn't going to be permitted to amount to anything that mattered in life, but he wasn't going to take a swan dive off of a roof in the hopes of being reborn in the next life with a quirk like what Bakugo had suggested. Izuku was going to defy his childhood friend turned childhood bully, even if it's only once in his life. What little life he had left anyway, as he found a secluded abandoned warehouse near some docks, going inside with a very long length of rope with one end tied in a noose. Although he'd be killing himself either way, by using a different method than what Bakugo taunted him with, Izuku would give him one last middle finger. After getting everything set up, Izuku got the noose around his neck, ready to kick the chair out from under himself. Izuku looked out the window, seeing that the skies above were now orange with sunset. It would be his last view before he took his own life, a life that was not worth living, considering how he'd been given nothing but grief for an accident of birth, for something that was well beyond his control. Taking a breath to steady himself, Izuku did a small jump on the chair he stood on so that he could kick it out from underneath himself, only to immediately fall into a black and purple swirling portal that suddenly appeared underneath him, then sliding out onto the cement floor of the abandoned warehouse about 10 feet from where he had tried to hang himself, the rope having been snipped quickly. Looking over, Izuku saw a man seemingly made of mist, dressed as what seemed to be a bartender. Seeing the remains of the portals fade away at the gesture of his hands, Izuku realized that this mist man was the one responsible for preventing his suicide. "Young man," the mist man began, his tone resonating with sympathetic heartbreak, "why did you try taking your own life?" Izuku, realizing he was a failure even at killing himself, couldn't help it as he broke down in tears. The mist man, acting on instinct that he found himself rather surprised to have, rushed to the green-haired boy and hugged him, gently swaying with him as he tried his best to reassure him that he'd be alright. After Izuku calmed down after about 5 minutes, he got to talking with the mist man, who gave his name as Kurogiri. Explaining himself, Kurogiri said that he's a member of the League of Villains and that he was scouting the abandoned warehouse as either a possible hideout for his group or a location they can use for private meetings with other criminal groups. Kurogiri also explained that he's working at the behest of his master, as well as the master's student. Kurogiri then explained that the reason why the League of Villains exists is because Hero Society in its blind obliviousness had soured far too many people, had failed too many people who were supposed to be safeguarded by said system itself. The master's student, who is named Shigaraki according to Kurogiri, wants to destroy the very society that had failed so many people, Shigaraki himself included, as well as Izuku himself. Kurogiri then got to asking Izuku why he was trying to kill himself. Dejectedly, Izuku gave the mist man his whole life story, from when he was slapped with a quirkless label, to what all had transpired prior to Kurogiri 86ing the suicide attempt. Izuku said that he wanted to prove everyone who had ever told him no that they were wrong, but those very people refused to even let him try to show what he could do. They refused him even one chance. Something that another group was prepared and more than willing to give to the boy. "What would you say to it?" Kurogiri began to offer, "if there was someone who could give you a quirk." Right away, Izuku perked up at that. "Someone who could give me a quirk?" Kurogiri nodded in the affirmative. "The master is looking for someone to serve as a bodyguard for Shigaraki for the immediate future. If your desire to prove wrong those who had denied you is strong enough, then I'm certain that the master will give you a quirk." Your master can give me a quirk." Kurogiri nodded in confirmation. His own quirk lets him take, hold onto, and redistribute the quirks of others as he sees fit. He has acquired many quirks in this manner. I'm certain that he would be indulgent in this case and give you one of the many quirks he has, provided of course that you're perfectly willing to leave your previous life behind and join up in full with the League of Villains. Izuku considered his options, a dejected look on his face as he looked over and saw the ruined remains of his suicide attempt. "Willing to leave my previous life behind, huh?" Izuku turned his attention to fully face Kurogiri. "You ask that of a person who had just moments ago tried to commit suicide. I don't care about my previous life, as it clearly didn't care about me. As a matter of fact, I don't care about anything anymore other than getting revenge, which society says I'm not allowed to do because it says I need a quirk to do anything at all, period." Kurogiri lacked anything that was part of a face, aside from eyes. Even so, one could get the idea that he was smirking. He opened a portal, gestured for Izuku to follow him. "The master will be interested in meeting you." Izuku, turning his back on everything since everything has turned its back on him, stepped into the portal and followed Kurogiri to his next life, his new life where he would have a quirk. Bakugo was wrong after all. To say that Izuku was intimidated would be an understatement. Kurogiri's master, All For One, despite being hooked up to a number of devices to help him live, radiated an aura of such power that Izuku felt it would take All Might himself to stand up to it. Despite how much Izuku was scared, he didn't fall to his knees as he feared that he would have. Rather, Izuku swallowed the lump in his throat to try to steady himself as All For One spoke. "Your story is much the same as that of my dear Tamura's," All For One began, save for being one chapter behind. "You were straight up abused and rejected for something beyond your ability to control. You have my sympathies, my boy. Come closer." At the bidding of All For One, Izuku approached him, clearly cowed. When the quirkless boy got close enough, All For One placed the tips of the fingers and thumb on his right hand to Izuku's forehead. Stopping short, there was confusion in what little of All For One's face that wasn't covered in scar tissue, but that confusion soon turned into amusement. "Well, I'll be, my boy. You, without any surgical improvements, already possess loads of potential for receiving quirks. You can easily hold more than one." Izuku was surprised to hear that. "More than one quirk? You'll be protecting my dear Tamura, so you'll be needing to be at your best," All For One said. "As such, I'll be giving you more than one quirk. And given the story you told me, I'll be looking into a certain quirk or two. For now, Kurogiri will take you to a spare bedroom above the bar here so that you may rest." You truly have been through more than what you should have gone through, and you'll need to be well rested for the trials to come. Having been shown more hospitality than he had ever known from strangers, Izuku gratefully accepted the rest, with Kurogiri warping him away. After a moment, Kurogiri came back in to see All For One having a video chat on the computer with his doctor friend, Daruma. I'm going to be needing super regeneration, my friend. A new project has popped up. Super regeneration, huh? Daruma said, I'll need a bit of time to duplicate extras from an already existing copy from now on. All For One said, I need the original for this one. Daruma was surprised by the order. The original, are you sure, my lord? I never jest on matters like this, my friend, All For One replied, and as we speak I have some goons going out to hunt down some voluntary donors, as it were. The good doctor gave All For One a serious look. You found someone with a very high quirk capacity limit, didn't you? Just make sure I get the original super regeneration soon, All For One replied as he ended the call. All For One then spoke to Kurogiri. How is he? Thankful that anyone at all is willing to give him a chance, Kurogiri replied. He seemed to have truly lost all hope that he would ever matter to anyone, to the world. Many nails had been put in to hammer that lid shut. All For One smirked. And the name of one of those nails is All Might. I wonder how the symbol of peace would react to it if he were to learn his actions had gone a long way to create one of the biggest threats that the society he's worked so hard to protect and serve all these years had ever faced. The symbol of evil then laughed in amusement to himself, wondering what all would be awaiting the League of Villains in the future, now that All Might had helped to greatly disillusion a boy who had once been his biggest fan. It was a source of amusement to All For One. Looking out the window of the bedroom that Kurogiri brought him to, Izuku looked more dejected than anything as he saw an edge of nighttime sky start to appear under the orange sunset. He was going to get a quirk multiple actually, and yet he didn't have it in him to be all that happy about it. It took Izuku throwing away the whole of his previous life to finally find a group of persons who saw value in him, who would give him a chance. Seeing value in him and giving him a chance were things that his previous life thought that he didn't deserve, based solely on him being quirkless. He was nothing to his previous life, not useful or valuable or even a friend. Eraser had expelled him because he lacked a quirk, All Might shattered his dreams because he lacked a quirk. And that's nothing compared to what all Bakugo had done because of his quirkless diagnosis. If it hadn't been for Bakugo exposing him during the apprehension test earlier today, then Izuku would have been home by now, telling his mom Inko about his first day as a UA student. Hell, that Tenya guy and your Raka girl might have been willing to give a quirkless nobody like him a chance and decide to be friends with him. But no. No, Bakugo's bias, representative of the bias of all of society, had decided that Izuku had no right to a happy life, and all because of how he had lacked that most basic of requirements to actually matter in a society like the one that ran the nation, a quirk. Well, that wouldn't be for long, given that All For One would be giving him a few to prep him for his new life as bodyguard to All For One student Shigaraki, who Izuku had yet to meet by this point. When Izuku asked him about Shigaraki on the way to this bedroom, all that Kurogiri said was that Shigaraki was a bit rough around the edges, yet if the master can get Shigaraki to work, then who knows how far Shigaraki will go. Izuku looked out his window one last time before pulling the curtains closed. He really was tired after what all he had gone through that day, and he was figuring that he needed to be well rested when he received quirks from the master. As such, the green-haired boy laid down on the bed in the room and tried getting some rest. Izuku had no idea what quirks he'd be getting, but he actually couldn't care less about it. He was going to finally have at least one quirk. He was actually going to matter. Hey man, don't you think you're being a little mean about it? It was the end of the day, and the students of UA High School's Class 1 had just left campus after taking care of some details. Some even loitered around a bit and were now just on their ways home, with some darkness edging on the orange sunset sky above. As a matter of fact, a group consisting of Katsuki Bakugo, Denki Kaminari, Kyoka Jiro, and Mina Shido were making their way to a nearby convenience store for some post-school munchies. It was Kaminari who expressed concern towards Bakugo. I mean, the dude was expelled solely because he was quirkless, Kaminari went on. He did nothing wrong, and even outdid more than one person in the assessment test as Aizawa-sensei did. I think that he was given quite the raw deal by Aizawa-sensei, who, for a guy that likes being rational and logical, was being irrational and illogical. That stupid nerd Deku had it coming. Bakugo retorted dryly, hell, he probably cheated in the written portion of the entrance exams. A few things, Mina began. 1. A person cannot be both stupid and a nerd at the same time, as nerds by their very definition are smart. 2. The written portion of the entrance exams was so heavily monitored that there was no way anyone ever could have possibly cheated on them. As such, Midoriya's passing of them had to be legit. Shrugging, Kyoka said, I think him being placed into the hero course was an error on the school's part. I mean, some of the courses at UA don't technically require those in them to have quirks, like Gen Ed or the support courses. Bakugo scoffed in an annoyed tone. Out of all of the possible times that Deku just had to show up after dropping off of Bakugo's radar, it just had to be the day that began Bakugo's path to fame and glory. And because Aizawa-sensei saw fit to give that nerd what he had coming, it had ruined the mood for everybody else. The next time that he saw Deku, Bakugo would give him yet another dose of punishment. The good old-fashioned explosion right into Deku's face ought to do the trick. Never failed before. As Bakugo and his group rounded the corner so that they were on the same street as their destination, Kaminari commented, "It's a damn shame that Shiro and Kirishima couldn't join us for the store run. They seem like cool dudes." Nodding in agreement, Mina said, "Oh yeah, and I can vouch for Kirishima, as he and I go way back. I knew him since early middle school. We're like siblings, always keeping an eye out for one another, looking for what's in each other's best interests." "Is that why you sent him in the direction of that girl in the 1B class who looks like Uraraka if she didn't trim her bangs?" Kyoka asked. "Hey, I saw how that mushroom girl was looking at Kirishima with bedroom eyes," Mina replied, "and now that I think about it, I wouldn't mind getting a similar gaze from Aram." Mina was cut off when, out of nowhere, some thugs came out from an alleyway and covered everyone's mouths with dampened cloths. The scent was clearly that of chloroform, the new stronger stuff that acted quickly like what was commonly seen in fiction. The UA students tried to fight back, Bakugo especially so. But they were overwhelmed, and collars that were keeping their quirk suppressed had been placed onto them. Just before he lost consciousness, Bakugo heard the guy who took him out say, "The boss will be interested in a voluntary donation from you and your friends." Hahaha. Later, right as the first full darkness of night had just settled, All For One in his chamber had just received the original super regeneration quirk, delivered by Dr. Daruma personally. "He's going to be taking some hits for my dear Tamura, so he'll need to be able to bounce back," All For One said. "Super regeneration, although I originally had a different plan for it, will be put to good use here." "You said that you were going to give Tamura's new bodyguard multiple quirks, Master," Kurogiri said. "What else aside from super regeneration?" All For One was about to answer, but he was cut off when the doors opened and Dr. Daruma walked in. "Master, some thugs are here about a pickup that they took care of for you. Do you know what they're talking about?" Under normal circumstances, it was ill-advised to interrupt the symbol of evil, unless you had something rather important that had to be brought to his attention. Luckily for the good doctor, aside from how he was, still, too useful, his message brought a devious smile to All For One's lips. "Excellent, my good man. Excellent." All For One pointed at something, a large black helmet mask with metal tubes on it. "That helmet. Bring it to me. I need to collect the advance payment for my dear Tamura's new bodyguard." Hahaha. Izuku awoke with a start when Kurogiri knocked on his bedroom door. Opening it, the runaway green-haired teen saw the misty villain. "At least you didn't use your quirk to warp into the room to awaken me. That would be a gross violation of your privacy," Kurogiri said, "and unless there's a rather dire emergency, I wouldn't even consider doing it." Izuku thought that it was strange how the first person outside of his mom to show him some basic human decency is a villain. That just went to further prove to the currently quirkless boy that in the current society, you were without value if you were also without a quirk. But that was an issue that would be resolved very soon. Izuku looked at Kurogiri, who handed him a folded stack of clothing, with a pair of durable boots, work or military grade, Izuku couldn't tell, sitting on top of the stack. "You'll be needing to change out of your current outfit and into this," Kurogiri explained. "I've also included a black scarf mask and a leather choker that has a voice-modifying dial on it. That'll help disguise your voice so that it'll be harder for others to recognize you. Also, I had no idea what size you wore, so I got the largest size possible, so at least it won't be too small. The belt I also included will help keep your new pants up if need be." The green-haired boy nodded in thanks as he received his new outfit. Kurogiri left and went to wait outside of the room, giving Izuku time to change. When he was done, Izuku came out. He now wore a long, baggy dark crimson-headed jacket with the hood down, genuine cowhide leather fingerless gloves, baggy cargo pants held up with a belt, the new boots, and the scarf mask up, covering the entire lower half of his face, as well as all of his nose. The leather choker was hidden under the scarf mask around his neck. "So what do you think?" Izuku asked, his voice now sounding like a certain blonde emperor from a popular isekai anime. Kurogiri nodded once. "According to the master, 2 of your new quirks will alter your appearance to the point you'd need not worry about being recognized by your hair or eye color." The misty villain offered an amused hum of a chuckle. "Your transformation will be complete." "I can't wait," Izuku replied dryly, a lot of his ability to care having been killed off. At the gesture of Kurogiri, Izuku followed him to go meet with All For One, now that All For One had things all ready for the newest member of the League of Villains. When Izuku and Kurogiri entered the room that the latter brought the former to, they found All For One standing there, wearing his helmet. "Ah, the timing is perfect, my boy," All For One said. "I have your new toys ready to be given to you." I hope that you and my dear Tamura will be able to get along and play nicely together." The symbol of evil beckoned Izuku to step forward, and the disguised green-haired boy did so. All for one, when Izuku had gotten close enough, reached forward and placed the ends of his right fingers and thumb on Izuku's forehead. "Now, you can hold up to 7 quirks from what I can feel," All for one said, considering that's without any sort of modification, it's truly amazing. For now, however, you will only be receiving 5 quirks. Super regeneration, plus 4 others that had been donated by some UA students. Izuku arched an eyebrow at his master. "You took the quirks of some UA students." It was a comment made solely of indifference, showing just how much care for much of anything that he had lost. So what if his master had stolen some quirks from some students over at UA? Why should Izuku care about any of it at all? UA was no longer his school, their various students no longer his classmates and schoolmates. All for one smirked at Izuku's indifference towards the heroes, he was already getting into the right mindset for their kind of work. It amused the symbol of evil greatly. "Now, since you're getting a total of 5 quirks, I'll give them to you one at a time. It'll be a bit of a painful process, so do try to bear with it. I'll start with super regeneration to help ease and dull some of the pain you'll feel during the whole process." Before Izuku could ask what his master was talking about, Izuku immediately felt like his whole person was on fire, as power had just started rushing into him. Never before had Izuku felt so much burning pain, but given how much suffering he had gone through in his life, the burning pain was nothing. It soon subsided, and Izuku felt the burning feeling rush away very quickly. But just as quickly as it had ended, the burning sensation returned. The next few times it happened, it didn't bother Izuku so much. Either he got used to it, or that super regeneration given to him first thing was already doing a bang-up job. Eventually, Izuku as he felt the burn again felt a bit hotter than before, as if his skin, eyes, hair, everything was burning brighter than ever before. Then his earlobes felt like they were growing, stretching out into wire-thin lengths, as horns felt like they were poking out of his head. After that, as Izuku caught his breath, All for one smiled. "The process is complete, my dear boy." "You were right, Master," Kurogiri said, his appearance has changed because of receiving those quirks. He's unrecognizable now. Curious, Izuku went to look in the mirror, and as he moved to do so, he heard All for one speak up. "The donors are still here before we leave them for the heroes to find," All for one said, "if you're interested in greeting any of them." Suddenly, the symbol of evil chuckled. "Silly me. I had failed to acquire your name, my dear boy." Nodding in agreement, Kurogiri said, "Now that the matter's been brought up, I never got your name either. What do you call yourself?" Izuku looked at himself in the mirror, saw what he looked like, knew what he was now. He was still Izuku, but that was a name in the past, from a life that saw fit to give him hell for an accident of birth that he had no control over. He had a new life now, and that required a new name. And he knew just what to use. It was Bakugo who had first awoken. His head was throbbing all over, but it was a dull, numbing throb from what he could feel. He also felt totally drained of energy, as if he hadn't slept in days. Looking down, Bakugo saw that he was sitting upright in an armless chair with a back, his body being bound to the chair with duct tape so that he would be kept upright. Looking around, the UA students spotted Kaminari, Kyoka, and some brunette-haired girl with fair skin who he failed to recognize, all of them in something of a curved line facing forward. All of them were still out of it, their heads hanging down. That meant that Bakugo was the only one awake. Bakugo knew that he needed to get out of there, needed to get everyone out of there. He woke up a bit more when he noticed that the others weren't wearing those bastard quirk-suppressing collars. He cracked his neck a bit, felt that he too lacked the collar himself. The UA student smirked to himself and willed his quirk to activate. Except nothing happened. Confused, Bakugo tried activating his quirk again, and once more nothing happened. Bakugo was starting to worry now. Looking over at the other teens, Bakugo needed to think of a plan to get all of them out of here, even though for some odd reason his quirk isn't. Hey, wait a minute, where did those earphone jack cords growing out of earplugs' earlobes go? Now Bakugo was starting to freak out a little. As he resorted to trying to struggle out of his restraints, he heard a sinisterly amused man's voice, the voice of All for One, although Bakugo didn't know that, call out to him via an intercom system. "Ah, so one of you is awake," All for One's voice greeted casually, as if he were simply saying hello to someone, "Greetings and salutations to you. I would like to thank you for the donations that you and your friends here made." "The donations," Bakugo said, still a little tired, "the hell are you on about?" It was then that All for One, sounding indifferent to the matter, gave Bakugo some news that would end up shaking the soon-to-be once proud teen to his very core. "Why, the quirks of you and your friends, of course. I took your quirks." That news made Bakugo go wide-eyed with alarm, perked him up into being more fully awake than he was before. No, there's no way you took her. I needed to prep the newest member of my fold for his new role as bodyguard to my dear student." All for One's voice went on, "Your quirk and the quirks of your friends here went to him. Worry not, for they will be put to good use, I assure you." As a matter of fact, my student's new bodyguard needs some training so that he can learn how to best make use of his brand new quirks. He can see you and your friends through a two-way mirror and would like to get started on some exercising. Hahaha. Bakugo was about to shout at the bastard voice, but he was cut off when someone entered the room. It was a person that Bakugo didn't recognize. He wore a long, baggy dark crimson hooded jacket with a hood down, genuine cowhide leather fingerless gloves, baggy cargo pants held up with a belt, a pair of durable-looking boots, and a black scarf mask which was currently worn up, covering the entire lower half of his face, as well as all of his nose. But that was just the guy's outfit. His physical appearance was an entirely different story. He had light pink skin, fluffy hair that was a darker shade of pink than his skin, a pair of pale yellow, pointed horns that were slightly curved protruding from his head, his eyes had black sclera and yellower eyes, and one pink cord was growing out and down from each of his earlobes, ending in pink earphone jacks. "Young man," All for One's boy said to Bakugo through the intercom system, "I would like for you to meet Salmon, the one who will be bodyguarding the next big name in evil." The ashy blonde teen looked to the villain who had just entered the room, a guy he completely failed to recognize. He looked like an unholy fusion of earplugs and Pinky, and it was then that he had some idea who the fair-skinned brunette girl might be. Salmon, as he had just been identified by the voice of All for One, turned to regard Bakugo, the only captive teen in the room who was awake. Bakugo struggled in vain to escape from his bindings as Salmon approached him, the palm of his right hand crackling with small blasts in a manner Bakugo knew all too well. Upon reaching Bakugo, Salmon pulled his right hand back and threw it right into Bakugo's face, blasting him in the face at point-blank range with an explosion that sent Bakugo and the chair he was sitting in flying back into the wall behind him. The force of the impact was so great that it caused Bakugo to pass out. But right before he had slipped fully into unconsciousness, he saw the villain who had his quirk, who had the quirks of the others with him, turn around and walk out of the room, mercifully leaving the others who had never woken up alone. The once proud teen wanted to say something, anything, but he was too tired and physically hurt. All he could do was pass out. Izuku couldn't believe it. He was actually able to get some payback on Bakugo at long last. And by using Bakugo's own quirk on him, too. Izuku also had the quirks of the other three who were with Bakugo, teens who the now formerly quirkless, formerly green-haired boy could tell full well were nothing more than a couple of Bakugo's lackeys. Izuku knew full well that Bakugo had no real friends. The ashy-haired bastard saw everyone as being beneath him. He only accepted people who followed him, not those who tried to stand beside him. Izuku felt nothing about how he had their quirks now, as lackeys of Bakugo were just as guilty as Bakugo himself. That, and the fact that they're also UA students. And that actually got Izuku to wonder, now that Bakugo and his lackeys were all quirkless, would UA kick them out? Kicking Izuku out upon finding out that he was quirkless had been Eraserhead's immediate reaction, doing so without a second thought or care. Wouldn't it be grand indeed if Bakugo and some lackeys of his were punished for something beyond their control? It would be the first time ever that Bakugo and even just one of his lackeys were punished. And they would be punished for a reason beyond their control, just like how Izuku himself had been treated pretty much all of his life. It was about damn time that Bakugo, and at least one of his lackeys, had received a sorely needed serving of humble pie. Izuku would have loved to see it when they're given the boot from UA. But he had other things to do. Later in the night, Kurogiri was in some woods outside of town, watching as Izuku was working with his new quirks, obviously trying to get the hang of using them. Hanging next to Kurogiri was Tamura Shigaraki, lanky, had a mess of medium-long gray hair, wore a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, black shoes, and was covered in hands, including one on his face that covered most of the face, although some fingers were parted so he could see through them. "That's the new bodyguard that sensei had prepared for me," Shigaraki said in a clearly skeptical tone as he pointed out at where Izuku was both practicing and honestly having a little bit of fun. "This Salmon fellow who sensei told me about. He's getting used to the quirks that the master has given him," Kurogiri explained. "He's had them for roughly an hour since before you first saw him, and yet he looks like he's already got them down pat enough for his first mission." Shigaraki contemplated what the misty villain said, then looked over where the new guy had just figured out how to spray acid from his mouth like a lizard spraying venom. "Oi. Salmon. Get over here," Shigaraki called out. Izuku stopped short and, turning to face where Shigaraki stood with Kurogiri, walked over to them. "So, you're my new bodyguard that sensei told me about, huh?" the handy villain said. "How can I tell if you'll actually be useful?" Izuku gave his new charge a wry look. "You want me to prove myself?" "You're damn straight I want you to prove yourself," Shigaraki replied. "Here's the deal. I'ma give you a little test of sorts. Pass, and I'll be more receptive to the idea of you covering my back." It was starting to sound something like a challenge in a video game, but the formerly quirkless teen nodded along. "What's the test?" "I want you to go out and kill a pro hero," Shigaraki replied. "Doesn't matter which one it is. I'll also want proof that you've killed said pro hero." You should very easily be able to find at least a sidekick level pro hero out patrolling the streets in town, back where the bar's located. You have starting now until Kurogiri opens the bar for the day tomorrow morning. Izuku took a look at the time on the watch that was also provided to him by Kurogiri earlier. It was 9:32 p.m. Kurogiri opens the bar at 6 a.m. Kurogiri is a bit of an early riser by his own admission, so Izuku figured he had roughly 8.5 hours to kill a pro hero and bring proof of said kill to Shigaraki. The formerly quirkless teen still couldn't believe it. He, who has only had quirks for a little over an hour so far, now has to not only kill, but the target has to be a pro hero who's had their quirk for all of their life. And that's another thing, Izuku has to kill a hero. He loved heroes, wanted to be a hero. He studied them extensively, studied their quirks. He got so good at it that he can now at a casual glance figure out a rudimentary idea of how a person's quirk worked. That's part of how he was able to work out his new quirk so quickly. It took him little time at all to figure out the explosion quirk for obvious reasons. But the heroes made their stance on him clear. Society had made its stance on him clear. He was without value to them because he didn't have a quirk. He was less valuable to them than literal garbage. Well, now Izuku did have a quirk. Multiple, actually, more than most people out there. If society required him to have a quirk for them to take him seriously, then Izuku was ready to impress all of them. But not as Izuku Midoriya. No, that person's gone now, killed by the cold indifference of a society that views might as being right. The formerly quirkless teen was going to be making his debut as Salmon, a name that he was going to make sure no one ever forgot. She was running. Running as fast as her high heels would allow her to. Of all the villains she had the dumb luck to run into while doing a night patrol, something she'd never do again if she made it out of this, she just had to run into him. She was lucky to get a head start, but given that she was in high heels and he was in boots that looked to have spikes in them, she was afraid that if she didn't catch a break, she'd be a goner. Luckily for her, she was able to rush into an alleyway before he was able to catch up to her. Given the maze-like layout of the alleyways in the city, it wasn't exactly difficult for her to shake him off her trail. If need be, she'd hide out until morning, then go out and go to safety. She even thought that she'd be able to spin her ordeal in her favor by getting out the story on how she had been able to survive a run-in with that man of all people. She was liking the sound of that already, and it gave her motivation to survive. All she had to do now was find a good hiding spot, hide for the night, then come morning she'd make her way out of the alleyway and ride on over to her hero agency, where she'd be. Hazip. She was cut off mid-thought when a stream of electricity flew out at her seemingly from out of nowhere, striking her and making her stumble back. When she regained her bearings, she saw that her attacker was a masked person with pink skin and hair, yellow horns growing out of his head, black eyes with yellower eyes, and he had earphone jack cords growing out of and down from his earlobes. He was heavily disguised, the upper half of his head and face being all of him that wasn't covered up. He stepped towards the woman as he spoke to her. The pro hero Iwabami. You'll do for my test, I suppose. The woman, revealed to be Iwabami, cursed her luck. She was chased by one villain, only to be caught by another. The only consolation to her was that it was clear this new guy and him were not working together. For someone who looks like a first year in high school, Iwabami began, hoping to buy time to figure out how to escape. You sound pretty mature. What's your name, villain? Salmon. He was really Izuku Midoriya and, earlier that day, he was a first year in high school. Emphasis on was. Now Izuku was a new recruit into the League of Villains, having been granted quirks by All for One, which the symbol of evil took from some of Izuku's former classmates. Not, of course, that Izuku cared about anyone or anything even remotely related to UA anymore, especially since his new quirks, aside from super regeneration, came from his old childhood bully, and 3 of said bully's lackeys he already got on the first day. Izuku, or as he preferred now Salmon, took another step forward. I have to prove myself by killing a pro hero. I was told the hero I go with doesn't matter, so I decided to go with the first one that I came across. That would be you. Izuku felt really into his role now. The voice that he spoke with thanks to the voice modifier dial even made him feel into the role. Electricity sparked in his left hand while small bursts of explosion sparked in his right. Iwabami backed up, unable to fully hide her nervousness in the situation. I think the killing you, Izuku began coolly, cutting off the heads of the snakes growing out of your head and leaving your body for the police and other heroes to find will be sufficient for my test. The test giver will see that I had done my job splendid. Pershink. Izuku stopped short and backed up a step out of surprise rather than fright when someone had snuck up to behind Iwabami and jabbed a bowie knife into the side of her neck before pushing the blade out and kicking the doomed pro hero over. As Iwabami bled out on the ground in the alleyway, the former student looked up at the assassin who stole his kill. He looked every bit like an assassin, white ninja mask over his eyes, red scarf, sleeveless jacket, pants, boots that had spikes on them, and he was armed to the teeth. He was fair-skinned, with a very slight hint of paleness to them. He also had long and wild black hair, and from what Izuku was seeing, he looked to be missing his nose entirely, although his white ninja mask covered it up. The assassin who stole Izuku's kill looked up from his victim and to the other villain in the alleyway. He arched a wry eyebrow at the pink boy who was right there in front of him. "And who might you be, boy?" the assassin asked. "Salmon Terror," Izuku replied dryly, "and you?" The assassin scoffed, knelt down to wipe his bowie knife off on the now deceased Iwabami's dress. "The name's Stain. I've taken it upon myself to do the job that society has grown too addicted to do itself." The former student arched a wry eyebrow at that. He then gestured to the body laying bleeding out on the alleyway ground. "And I suppose that said job involves stealing kills from others." Stain, for the first time since the conversation started, had a look on his face other than pure cold indifference. There was now a slight but notable hint of piqued interest in his eyes. "And what business do you have in trying to kill false heroes?" "Kill false heroes?" The pink boy replied with a hint of confusion in his tone. "Oh no, I'm just trying to prove myself to the group that took me in, the League of Villains, by completing the test given to me by a leading member to kill a pro hero. It didn't matter which pro hero it was, I just had to find and kill one, then bring back proof." Pointing to where Iwabami laid on the ground, Izuku went on, "She was the first one I spotted all night, so I decided to go with her." Stain had a look of consideration on his face, one that suggested he didn't exactly approve of the reason the villain whelp in front of him had. "You don't saw, but you do have a point on how she is, or rather was, a false hero." The assassin stopped short when Izuku cut him off. Izuku looked down at his right hand, clenched it tight as he wore a resigned, mildly somber look. "I learned something earlier today, Stain," the pink boy said, "that as far as the society cares, might makes right. Society doesn't care if you actually want to do the right thing, it doesn't care how hard you work or how much effort you put into things. All it cares about is if you're strong or not." Izuku opened his right hand back up, small burst pops of explosions flying up as the hand opened. "Whether or not life rewards or punishes you rests solely on accident of birth. Your life is virtually determined for you from the moment you started. It's something you can't control." Stain's previous thoughts about the villain whelp before him changed when he said he was killing Iwabami solely because she was the first hero he came across and he needed to kill one for some test to be accepted by a villain group. Stain, in all honesty, saw Salmon as nothing more than a petty villain, hoping to join a petty group so that he would have just a bit more cover in tight situations. But now, after hearing Salmon explain himself, the air he gave off making it clear he was being sincere in his words, Stain saw that the pink boy was acting with some purpose. The assassin lowered his hostility, straightened up a bit. "You have drive, that much I can tell," Stain said. "Tell me. Why partner up with this League of Villains that you mentioned?" "Well, for starters, they saved me from my suicide attempt earlier today," Izuku began, the level of casualness in his tone when mentioning he had tried ending his own life earlier, actually catching Stain off guard a bit. "They're the first group of people that have actually been willing to give me a chance," Izuku went on. "They even took me in since by no means can I ever go home again. And there's one other thing they can help me with, which would be getting back at society, who never told me anything save for how I wouldn't amount to anything," Izuku replied dryly, although a lot of my personal experience had told me that the reason why society said that I wouldn't amount to anything is due solely to the fact that society was never going to give me a chance to try. Again, that whole accident of birth spiel that I had given to you a moment ago. Stain arched a wry eyebrow, sheathed his bowie knife away before speaking up. "All of those pretenders who have the gall to falsely hold the title of hero play a large part in how your worldview had been shaped, young man. They have lulled society into a false sense of security, have allowed society to accept anyone to slip into the hero role. Society is addicted to these false heroes, they'll idolize any glory hound claiming to be one. This addiction had led to a cancer, the false heroes themselves being the tumor that sprung up from it." The former student gave Stain a dry, knowing look. "Sometimes, tumors have to be cut off or out in order to allow for proper healing." The assassin smirked a bit in amusement at the assessment made by the villain whelp before him. "So you understand." Stain looked down at where Iwabami laid forever still on the ground in the alleyway, an ever-growing pool of warm, rich life crimson forming around the area of her head and upper torso. The assassin looked back up to Izuku. "You said your name was Salmon Terror, right? Apologies for stealing you kill, but that one there was on my list for a while. This was my third time finding her, but she was always somehow able to get away from me. And my showing up here allowed you to kill her at last," Izuku said dryly. "The most that I can claim in Iwabami's death would be scoring an assist since I occupied her time long enough for you to come on in and deal the necessary blow." Stain nodded once to the pink boy, the nod conveying another apology. "I wish you luck in your hunt, Salmon Terror. If you and I end up crossing paths in the future where we're both gunning down the same false hero, I'll let you deal the final blow." Izuku nodded dryly in thanks before the assassin turned around and took off. After Stain was gone, Izuku let out a breath, then turned his attention to where Iwabami laid on the alleyway ground. If Iwabami really did turn out to be the only pro-hero he would come across during his hunt, then Izuku hoped that the assist he scored would be enough to convince Shigaraki to let him try again at scoring his own kill. Izuku still needed proof that he had at least some role in the slaying of the hero at his feet, so he took out his own hunting knife, yet another item that was in the pile of clothing that was supplied to him by Kurogiri, and used it to cut off the heads of the snakes that were growing out of her head. After placing the severed snake heads in a pouch, Izuku wiped the hunting knife blade off on Iwabami's dress. Izuku then decided to loot the golden snake-like bracelets from her wrists and ankles. They're an iconic part of Iwabami's hero outfit, so Shigaraki would figure them to be another sign that Izuku had done at least some work. With trinkets and trophies in hand, the former student figured that he had enough to prove he had some role in slaying Iwabami, so he turned around and took off. Later the following morning at around 5:45 am, Izuku appeared in the bar ran by Kurogiri. "In case you're wondering, Kurogiri," began the former student, "I failed Shigaraki's test. The only pro-hero I came across in my hunt all night was Iwabami, and this assassin villain fellow who called himself Stain stole my kill. At best I can only claim an assist in taking down the hero." "Yes, the news of Iwabami's death has already started to spread around," Kurogiri began to say. "I suspect that it'll make the morning news when I turn it on at 6. However, you may need not have to worry about having technically failed Shigaraki's test." The misty villain sat down the glass he was cleaning on the counter of the bar, which he was standing behind. Kurogiri turned to look right at the League of Villains' newest recruit. Izuku arched a wry eyebrow at Kurogiri and was about to ask him what he meant by that. But before the words left the pink boy's mouth, a man stepped out of the bathroom, catching his attention. The man was fair-skinned, had gray hair, and he wore a purple dress blazer with matching dress pants, a white dress shirt under the blazer, which was worn open to show the dress shirt, a pair of plain-looking yet shiny black dress shoes, a pink scarf of some kind around his neck, and a pair of small round lens glasses, whose lenses were partly shaded. Gesturing to the man who just came out of the bathroom, Kurogiri said, "Salmon, this here is Jiren. He's something of a notable figure in the villain underworld of Japan, acting as an info broker. He's also helping the League of Villains with gathering enough recruits for a special project that we have planned sometime early next week. And speaking of the part where I'm looking for recruits to join your little powwow," the now identified Jiren said as he sat down at the bar, "our good friend Salmon here has made things loads easier for me. His run-in last night with the hero killer had spread the name of the League of Villains around like a wildfire. Helping even more is how, according to sources who heard the hero killer talk about the matter at a villain's bar far from here, Salmon was talked about with a notable hint of respect." Turning to look at Izuku, Kurogiri added, "And you having earned the respect of someone in the business as notable as Stain has led to a number of recruits seeking out the League of Villains to join us. Jiren and I will explain things to Shigaraki when he wakes up in a bit, but I'm certain that he'll be more receptive to the idea of you working with us, even though you did technically fail his little test that he had given you." Izuku nodded in understanding, then sat down at the bar and asked if Kurogiri served coffee in the mornings. The misty villain replied in the affirmative, mentioning that Jiren had also asked for some coffee, going into the bathroom to use it as Kurogiri got the coffee brewer going. The coffee was about ready, and when Kurogiri asked if they wanted creamers, Jiren voiced a want for Irish creme, while Izuku asked if there was any hazelnut creamer. Both were available, and the three of them, Kurogiri poured himself a mug of coffee as well, and he preferred French vanilla, had mugs of coffee as they passed what time there was prior to Shigaraki waking up and the morning news broadcasting. At around 6, a groggy and yawning Shigaraki, wearing only his black long-sleeved shirt and a pair of pants, came shuffling down for the morning. After he got some coffee as well, he like Jiren preferred Irish creme and sat down. Kurogiri and Jiren explained everything to him about how Izuku's run-in with the hero killer had led to things being made much smoother in the long run, despite how Stain stealing the kill meant that Izuku technically failed the little test. Shigaraki, although a bit annoyed at the technical failure, was appeased by what all benefit sprung up from it. Also, Shigaraki was amused by how Izuku claimed that he only scored an assist, as scoring assists and kills is common talk in video games, of which Shigaraki was rather fond. The handy villain further laughed when the trinkets and trophies that the pink boy had gathered were shown. "You didn't complete the primary win condition, Salmon," Shigaraki began, "but you've been able to find and score an alternative win condition instead. As much as it annoys me that we're piggybacking off of the hero killer, I won't deny that having all of those extra hands on deck for our big job early next week will come in handy." Gesturing to where the bracelets and snake heads looted from Iwabami, the snake heads were on a towel provided by Kurogiri, laid on the bar counter. Shigaraki added with a darkly amused chuckle, "The proof of the assist that you had scored is pretty damn amusing, too." jerking a thumb at the wall-mounted TV which was playing the morning news that began with breaking news coverage of Iwabami's death, Jiren said, and the news made a note of how the hero killer had had help in taking down Iwabami last night, since the snake heads and bracelets were looted, and Stain's been noted to have never looted from the heroes he's killed before. Word of your actions are already spreading. Speaking of the loot, Shigaraki began, what should we do with it? The snake heads are useless, so you might as well dust them, Jiren remarked to the handy villain. Picking up one of the bracelets, Jiren went on, as for these bracelets, however, they have some legitimate value. I know of at least a few up-and-coming persons in Japan's villain underground who would love to get one of these. Let me take all 4 of them and see if I can find some buyers for any of them. Shigaraki nodded in agreement. Extra pocket cash is always nice. Hey, what did Jiren mean by saying you should dust the snakeheads? Izuku asked dryly. Giving his new bodyguard, yes, Shigaraki did officially accept him anyway. A wry look, Shigaraki picked up one of the snakeheads, the yellow king cobra one, and held it up using only the ends of all 5 fingers on his right hand. Within moments, the cobra head cracked, turned gray, and crumbled away into a fine powdery dust. Izuku arched an eyebrow at that as Shigaraki said while moving to pick up a second snakehead, what you saw just now is what Jiren's talking about. My quirk is called Decay. It lets me disintegrate anything that I touch with all 5 digits on one of my hands. Shigaraki then went on to dust the other 2 snakeheads. Of course, I have to be careful with how I handle things, as I can't control what my quirk does and doesn't dust. Would a pair of artist's gloves help? Izuku suggested, they'll cover your ring and pinky fingers, so you can grab things with all 5 digits on a hand, without said hand activating your quirk without you wanting it to. Shigaraki opened his mouth as if to talk back, but he stopped short before getting a word out. He wore a contemplative look on his face, then turned to look at Kurogiri. Does that sound to you like it'll work? Shigaraki asked. So long as you're careful in putting them on and taking them off, I fail to see how it wouldn't, replied the misty villain. Turning to look at Izuku, Kurogiri said in a mildly impressed tone, I've got to say, Salmon. That sounds like a good idea. Studying quirks and how they work has always been a hobby of mine, Izuku admitted. From the looks of Shigaraki's quirk, all 5 digits on a hand have to be uncovered in order for the quirk to work. Artist's gloves will help to mitigate the aspect of the quirk that makes it activate without Shigaraki's consent. Shigaraki looked amused by Izuku's talk of studying quirks. Can you also study the quirks of heroes as well? You'd be amazed by the notes on heroes' quirks that I had in my previous life, Izuku said, but even if said notebooks still exist, I have no way of getting to them, sad as it is. Kurogiri, Jiren, and Shigaraki were all looking at Izuku with wide-eyed looks of surprise. It would seem that we have someone who's really good at analyzing quirks in our midst now, said Kurogiri, a hint of amusement in his tone that may come in handy during the big job that we got early next week. Jiren nodded in agreement. Oh yeah. In fact, if we're somehow able to get a hold of those notes that Salmon here says he had before in his quote-unquote previous life, I'm willing to bet that a number of persons in Japan's villain underground would love to study them. Izuku shrugged. I can try sneaking back to where I had used to live before society decided to give my life one last middle finger. Knowing my mom, I bet that she can't bear to get rid of any of my old stuff. The pink boy looked at the others in the bar with him. Those notes cover all pro heroes who had been in the top 10 in the hero billboard charts, JP at any point over the last 5 years or so, plus dozens if not hundreds other some odd heroes of note in that time as well. The most recent hero that I remember making analysis notes on is Mount Lady. She debuted sometime mid to late last year, Shigaraki commented, his interest now very much peaked, she's still pretty damn fresh as a pro hero. Looking to Izuku, the handy villain went on, and you say you got analysis on heroes over the course of at least 5 years. Upon seeing the affirmative nod from his bodyguard, Shigaraki said, alright, I want you to try to recover all of those notes of yours. If you're as good at analyzing the quirks of various pro heroes as you are at my quirk to figure out how I can keep it from going off when I don't want it to, then those notes would be a serious boon to our efforts. Kurogiri and Jiren both nodded in agreement, with Kurogiri even applauding the former student. It actually took Izuku by surprise that he was being praised, that his quirk analysis work was of interest to other people. In the past, whenever someone saw or heard of said work, it had been dismissed as the nerdy habits of a nerdy loser, would never actually amount to anything that actually mattered in society. Now those insights he developed and theorized on how the quirks of various persons worked were being sincerely desired. The pink boy couldn't believe it. For the first time in his life since prior to being diagnosed as quirkless back when he was 4, Izuku felt that he legitimately had those who he could count as friends. As Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and Jiren were talking to one another, Izuku looked away and up to the wall-mounted TV, allowing his mind to wander. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the TALESPINNER69 for writing that awesome fanfic. See you in the next video. Goodbye.